Wild stallion discovers rancher tied in the Badlands. What happened next amazed everyone. The Badlands stretched far and wide, rough and quiet, shaped by time and wind. Dry hills rose and fell like frozen waves, their edges sharp and broken. The ground was hard, cracked, and covered with dust that moved easily with even the lightest breeze. Very few people came this far. The land was not friendly, and it did not forgive mistakes. Only those who truly understood it could survive here. Among these wide, empty spaces lived a wild stallion. He was known to the land long before he was known to people. His coat was dark like storm clouds, marked with lighter streaks from old dust and sun. His mane moved freely in the wind, long and untamed, just like him. He had been born in these Badlands and had grown strong by learning every sound, every smell, and every danger the land could offer. The stallion was not like other horses. Many who had seen him from far away spoke quietly about him. Ranchers and travelers said he was unusually alert, unusually calm. He did not panic easily, and he did not act without reason. When other animals fled, he observed. When danger passed, he remembered. Over the years, he had learned where water stayed longest after rain, which paths were safe, and which places should never be crossed alone. He led a small group once, but time and nature slowly changed things. Now he mostly moved on his own, choosing quiet places where he could watch without being seen. The Badlands were harsh, but they were honest. The stallion trusted them more than he trusted unfamiliar movement or noise. One morning, as the sun slowly climbed over the jagged hills, the stallion stood on higher ground. From there he could see far across the land. The air was cool, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant plants. Everything felt normal, yet something deep inside him stirred. It was not fear, it was awareness. He lifted his head and breathed deeply. Mixed into the usual sense was something strange. It was not animal, it was not plant, it was human. Humans did not often come this far, and when they did, they usually passed through quickly. This scent, however, stayed in one place. It carried stress, heat, and weakness. The stallion's ears turned forward. He stood very still. The land was quiet in a way that felt wrong. No birds called nearby. No small animals moved through the rocks. Silence in the Badlands usually meant caution. Slowly, the stallion began to move. He did not rush. His steps were careful, placing his hooves where the ground was firm. As he traveled, the smell grew stronger. The sun rose higher, warming the land, and the wind shifted slightly. With it came another signal: fear. The stallion had sensed fear before, mostly from animals being hunted or trapped. This fear was different. It was heavy and tired. As he moved down into a shallow valley, he noticed signs that did not belong. The earth was disturbed. Rocks were pushed aside. Faint marks showed where something had been dragged. Humans left messy signs when they struggled against the land, and this place held many of them. The stallion slowed even more. At the edge of a dry ravine, he stopped. Below him, something lay among the rocks. At first, it did not move. The stallion watched from above, muscles ready but calm. After a long moment, the shape shifted slightly. A sound followed, soft, weak, and uneven. It was a man. The rancher had been there for hours, maybe longer. His clothes were covered in dust, his face burned by the sun. Thick ropes held his arms and legs, cutting into skin already dry and sore. His lips were cracked and his breathing was shallow. He had stopped calling for help long ago. The land had not answered. When the stallion stepped closer, small stones rolled down the slope. The sound caught the man's attention. He turned his head slowly, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. When he saw the horse, his heart jumped, not with fear but with disbelief. A wild stallion stood before him, tall and powerful, outlined by the bright sky. The man tried to speak, but his voice barely worked. He did not move much. He had learned that struggling only made things worse. He simply looked, unsure whether this was real or something his tired mind had created. The stallion studied him. Wild animals usually avoided humans. This stallion had learned that long ago. Humans brought noise, sharp smells, and unpredictable movement. Still, something about this man held the stallion's attention. He was not threatening. He was still. His eyes showed exhaustion, not danger. The stallion stepped closer. The man closed his eyes for a moment, expecting the horse to flee. When he opened them again, the stallion was still there. The horse lowered its head slightly, breathing warm air into the space between them. The rancher felt it on his skin. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, pressing down with heat. The stallion shifted his position so his body blocked some of the sunlight from reaching the man's face. He did not know why he did this. He simply responded to instinct. In the wild, weakness often attracted danger, but it could also awaken protection. A shadow moved across the ravine as clouds passed overhead. The stallion's ears flicked at distant sounds. He remained alert, watching the horizon, then the man, then the horizon again. He stood between the man and the open land like a quiet guard. The rancher noticed this and felt something he had not felt since being left there: hope. He did not reach out. He did not speak loudly. He simply stayed still, understanding that sudden movement could scare the animal away. His breathing slowly became steadier. The stallion sniffed the ropes carefully. The smell of old fiber and human sweat was strong. He nudged one rope with his nose. It did not move much. He pulled back slightly, surprised by the resistance. Still, he did not leave. Minutes turned into longer moments. The stallion lifted his head and looked toward the hills again. Somewhere far away, the land carried faint sounds. Maybe other humans, maybe not. The stallion could not be sure. But he remembered the scent paths, the places where humans often traveled. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped away from the man and walked a short distance, then stopped and looked back. The man watched, heart sinking, thinking the horse was leaving. But the stallion did not run. He turned and came back, standing even closer than before. He lowered his head again and breathed deeply. Dust clung to his mane. The sun reflected softly off his coat. Something had changed. The Badlands, so empty and unforgiving, now held a quiet connection between two living beings who did not share language, only presence. The stallion had not chosen the land that morning expecting anything unusual. Yet here he stood, facing a situation no instinct book of survival had prepared him for. The man, tied and helpless, looked into the horse's dark eyes. In them, he did not see fear or wildness. He saw awareness. And in the stillness of the Badlands, as heat shimmered over the rocks, the stallion remained, watching, listening, and silently deciding what to do next. The sun moved slowly across the sky, turning the rocks warmer and the air heavier. Time felt thick in the Badlands, as if it moved differently there. The stallion stayed close to the rancher, never stepping too far away. When the wind changed, he adjusted his position. When shadows shifted, he shifted too. He did not sleep. He watched. The rancher's thoughts drifted in and out. His body felt weak, and every small movement reminded him of the ropes. He had tried earlier to free himself, but that only took away his strength. Now he saved his energy. The presence of the stallion gave him a reason to stay calm. It was strange how a wild animal could bring such comfort without a single sound. The stallion lowered his head again and sniffed the ground around the man. He followed the disturbed earth with his nose, tracing the path of what had happened earlier. He did not understand ropes or knots, but he understood struggle. He had seen animals caught in thorny bushes, legs stuck between rocks, unable to move. Sometimes they escaped. Sometimes they did not. In those moments, the land taught lessons without mercy. The stallion touched the rope with his nose once more, gently this time. The man felt it and held his breath. The rope moved slightly. It was not much, but it was something. The stallion pulled back and shook his head, unsure of the rough texture against his skin. Still, he did not turn away. Far away, a bird called. The sound echoed and then faded. The stallion lifted his head and listened, then looked toward the open land again. The Badlands stretched endlessly, but he knew certain paths led toward places where humans often appeared. He remembered distant sounds from other days, voices, metal tools, the soft rhythm of hooves guided by human hands. The stallion made a choice guided by instinct rather than thought. He stepped back from the man and walked several paces away, then stopped and looked back again. The rancher noticed and felt a mix of fear and hope. He did not know what the horse intended, but he trusted the moment. He trusted the calm in the animal's movements. The stallion turned and moved uphill, his steps steady and strong. He stopped at the top, lifted his head, and released a loud call that rolled across the land. It was deep and clear, cutting through the quiet like a signal. Then he listened. No answer came at first. He called again, longer this time. The sound traveled farther, bouncing off rocks and hills. Somewhere beyond sight, it reached open ground. The stallion returned to the ravine, standing beside the rancher once more. The man swallowed and whispered a few broken words, not expecting a response. His voice was dry, but it carried gratitude. The stallion stood close, his body blocking the sun again. The heat was intense now, but the shade helped. The man's breathing became more even. He focused on staying awake. Time passed. The stallion repeated the call again and again, each time from a slightly different position. Sometimes he stood higher, sometimes closer to the ravine. Each call was followed by silence, but he did not stop. Persistence was something the land had taught him well. At one point, the stallion nudged the rope again, this time using the edge of his hoof carefully. The rope shifted a little more. The man felt a sharp sting, then relief as pressure changed. The knot did not break, but it loosened slightly. It was enough to remind the man that help was still possible. The stallion pulled back quickly, startled by the sudden movement. He snorted softly and stamped the ground once. Then he calmed himself, lowering his head and breathing slowly. He had learned patience from long days without water and long nights without shelter. In the distance, something changed. The stallion's ears turned sharply. He lifted his head and focused. There was a sound, faint but real. It was not wind. It was not an animal. It was human movement. Voices carried unevenly by the breeze. The stallion stood very still, listening carefully. The sound faded, then returned. This time it was clearer. He released another strong call, louder than before. Far away, a group of ranch hands had been searching the Badlands. They had followed broken tracks and signs left behind by a missing rider. The land made searching difficult, hiding clues beneath dust and rock. When they heard the sound, they stopped. "That's a horse," one of them said. They listened again. The call came once more, steady and strong, coming from a direction they had not yet checked. They turned their horses and followed the sound. Back at the ravine, the stallion stayed close to the rancher, as if he understood that something important was happening. The man noticed the change in the horse's behavior. The stallion was alert, focused, but not anxious. Minutes later, faint shapes appeared on the horizon. The rancher's heart began to race. He squinted against the sunlight. The shapes grew clearer, horses, moving carefully through the broken land. The stallion lifted his head high and called again. This time the sound was answered. A human voice called back, surprised and hopeful. The stallion stepped away from the man and moved toward higher ground, stopping where he could be clearly seen. He stood tall and still, an unmistakable figure against the sky. The ranch hands spotted him. At first they slowed, unsure. Wild horses were unpredictable, and this one looked powerful and free. But something about his behavior was different. He did not flee. He did not challenge. He simply stood and watched. One of the riders followed the stallion's gaze and noticed movement below. He rode closer, carefully guiding his horse down toward the ravine. When he saw the tide man, he shouted for the others. Relief washed over the group. They moved quickly but carefully, working together to reach the rancher. Water was given first, slowly and gently. Then the ropes were removed with practiced hands. The rancher looked up weakly and searched the area with his eyes. The stallion was still there, standing nearby, watching quietly. One of the ranch hands shook his head in disbelief. "That wild horse led us here," he said softly. The others nodded, stunned by what they were witnessing. As the rancher was helped to his feet and supported onto a horse, he looked once more at the stallion. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The stallion took a step back, then another. He watched until the group began to move away. Only then did he turn toward the open Badlands. He did not follow. His place was here, among the rocks and wind. The land welcomed him back without question. As he moved across the hills, the Badlands returned to their usual quiet, but something had changed. A moment of connection had passed through this harsh place, leaving behind a story that would not fade easily. And though the stallion disappeared into the wide land, the memory of what he had done remained, carried by those who saw it, and by one man who would never forget the day a wild presence became his only hope. The rancher's journey back from the Badlands was slow and careful. His body was weak, and every movement reminded him how close he had come to being lost forever. The ranch hands rode gently, choosing smoother paths and stopping often so he could rest. Water was given in small amounts, and his face was covered to protect him from the harsh sun. Through it all, his mind kept returning to one image, the wild stallion standing against the sky, watching without fear. As they traveled, the rancher spoke little. His voice was still dry and his strength had not returned. But when he did speak, it was always about the horse. He described how the stallion stayed near him, how it blocked the sun, how it never ran away. The ranch hands listened closely. Some of them had spent their entire lives around horses, yet none had ever heard a story like this. When they reached the ranch, word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered quietly, curious and concerned. The rancher was helped inside, laid down, and given proper care. A local helper checked his injuries and made sure he was stable. Everyone felt relief knowing he would recover. That night, the rancher could not sleep. His body rested, but his mind stayed awake. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the Badlands again. He saw the rocks, the heat, and the moment he had given up hope. Then he saw the stallion appear, calm and strong, like something sent by the land itself. The next morning, visitors came to check on him. Friends, nearby ranchers, and workers who had joined the search all wanted to hear what had happened. The rancher told the story slowly, choosing simple words. He explained how the stallion had appeared when he was sure no one else would. He spoke about the animal's patience, its awareness, and the way it seemed to understand his situation without being taught. Some listeners shook their heads in disbelief. Others stayed silent, thinking deeply. In a place where nature was often seen as harsh and unforgiving, this story felt different. It reminded them that the land could also surprise them in gentle ways. As days passed, the rancher grew stronger. He could sit up, then walk slowly and eventually stand outside again. Each step felt like a gift. He often looked toward the distant hills, wondering where the stallion was now. He hoped the horse was safe, moving freely as before. The story continued to spread. Travelers passing through heard it and carried it onward. People from nearby towns came to ask questions. They wanted details, proof, explanations. The ranch hands confirmed everything. They described how the wild stallion had stood his ground, how it had clearly led them to the ravine. No one could explain it fully, but no one denied it either. Some said the stallion must have been trained once and returned to the wild. Others believed the horse had simply followed instinct. The rancher did not argue with any of them. To him, the reason mattered less than the result. He was alive because something chose to stay instead of leaving. Weeks later, the rancher insisted on returning to the Badlands. He was not reckless about it. He prepared carefully and did not go alone. A few trusted riders joined him. They did not expect to find anything, but the rancher felt he needed to go back. When they reached the area near the ravine, the land looked the same. Wind moved across the rocks. The sky stretched endlessly above. No signs remained of what had happened. Ropes were gone. Tracks had faded. Nature had already begun to erase the moment. The rancher stood quietly, removed his hat and closed his eyes. He whispered a few words of thanks, not to anyone in particular, but to the land, to life, and to the wild presence that had stayed when it mattered most. As they turned to leave, one of the riders pointed toward a distant ridge. For a brief moment, a dark shape stood against the horizon, tall, still, watching. No one spoke. The shape did not move closer. It did not run. After a short while, it turned and disappeared behind the hills. The rancher smiled softly. He did not need proof. He did not need answers. He carried something stronger now, a deep respect for the quiet intelligence of the wild, and a reminder that help does not always arrive in the form we expect. From that day forward, the rancher treated the land differently. He listened more. He moved more carefully. And whenever he saw wild horses in the distance, he remembered the stallion who had stood beside him in the worst moment of his life. The Badlands remained harsh and wide, but to him, they were no longer empty. They held a story, one of patience, instinct, and a silent bond that would live on long after footprints had faded. Life slowly returned to its normal rhythm at the ranch, but nothing felt the same anymore. The days still began early, the work was still hard, and the land was still demanding, yet something inside the rancher had changed forever. Every sunrise felt more meaningful. Every breath felt earned. As his strength fully returned, he began working again, but with more care than before. He no longer rushed through tasks or ignored signs from the land. If the wind shifted suddenly, he paid attention. If animals acted uneasy, he paused and observed. The Badlands had taught him a lesson he would never forget. People continued to talk about what had happened. The story traveled farther than he expected. Some heard it from ranch hands, others from travelers passing through. Each person retold it in their own way, but the heart of the story remained the same. A wild stallion had stayed when it did not have to, and because of that, a man lived. Visitors sometimes came to the ranch hoping to hear the story directly from him. The rancher never exaggerated. He spoke calmly, using simple words, always careful to honor the truth. He did not call the stallion a hero or a miracle. He simply described what he saw, what he felt, and how the animal behaved. "The horse didn't save me like in stories," he would say. "He stayed. That was enough." Many left with a new respect for the natural world, realizing that understanding does not always require words. Over time, the story became part of the region's shared memory. Older ranchers used it as a reminder to younger workers to never underestimate the land or the animals that lived on it. Parents told it to children as an example of awareness and patience. It became a story not about danger but about connection. The rancher himself changed in small but noticeable ways. He began carrying extra water on long rides, even if the weather looked safe. He checked ropes and gear twice. He no longer laughed at caution. Instead, he respected it. Sometimes, while riding near the edges of the Badlands, he spotted wild horses in the distance. They moved freely, untouched, their manes lifted by the wind. He never tried to get closer. Watching from afar felt right. He knew that the stallion, if still alive, belonged to the open land, not to fences or human control. One evening, while the sky burned orange and gold, the rancher stood quietly outside his home. The land was calm. The wind was gentle. In the distance, he thought he saw movement on a ridge just for a moment. A familiar shape, strong and still. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply nodded as if greeting an old friend who understood silence as well as he did. Seasons passed. Dust storms came and went. Rain softened the ground and then disappeared again. Life continued its steady flow, yet the story never faded. It lived in conversations, in quiet moments, and in the way people looked at the land afterward. The rancher grew older, but the memory stayed sharp. Even years later, he could recall the warmth of the stallion's breath, the shadow it cast against the sun, and the feeling of not being alone when hope was nearly gone. When asked what he learned that day, he always gave the same answer. "The wild is not cruel," he said. "It is honest. If you listen, it will tell you when to fight and when to be still." And for everyone who heard the story, it became a reminder that sometimes the most powerful acts are not loud or dramatic. Sometimes they are silent, steady, and carried out by those who expect nothing in return. In the end, nothing about the land itself had changed, but the people who lived beside it had, and that made all the difference.